alternative chronology, or new chronology if you wish, would win. So historical revisionism would prevail in the next decades, like maybe 20 to 50 years, or even less than that. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let's talk about new chronology, or alternative chronology in general, okay? So the usual chronology that we use today was established in its essential parts very late, actually, sometime in late 16th century, which curiously enough actually reinforces various new chronologies, alright? And it has been a relatively well-documented process in itself. And since then, many people have actually had problems with it, right? A notable example would be Isaac Newton, but there have been many other people who also did some sort of like alternative chronology type of research, right? The viewers of this channel would be well familiar with the name of Velikovsky, just as one example, who was reviewing the biblical chronology pretty much well, in his own framework, let's put it this way, right? And a notable branch in modern discourse is represented by Fomenko, of course, Nikolai Fomenko, or Nikolai, whatever his name is, okay, first name. So he's a topologist, right? I know that Nikolai Fomenko is a comedian, right? But is Alexander? I don't know, I don't remember. But anyway, so he's a topologist, a mathematician, right? And his main ideas in terms of chronology he took actually from other person, from Morozov, Alexander Morozov. There have been a joke actually about, you know, how in alternative chronologies, like several people in different historical eras are often like people say it's the same person, just like put in different places in different timelines. So there was a joke about Fomenko that Fomenko is actually Nikolai Morozov, Alexander Morozov, just living like, you know, it's the same person. Basically, which is kind of funny. So Alexander Morozov actually invented the term new chronology, I think. So he was a terrorist, a high-degree Freemason, involved in the assassination of the Russian Emperor Alexander II at the end of the 19th century. So he was a pretty interesting character, okay? But so he pretty much came up with main ideas that Fomenko later echoed in his own works, right? But unfortunately, Fomenko also added a lot of crap on top of these ideas. So it's not, like, Fomenko per se is not really a great character, a great researcher in this respect at the very least. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, like, why is Fomenko so popular? So there is also obviously the phantom time hypothesis by Herbert Illig, more modern researcher. And also other researchers who I sympathize more have delved into this topic, like, for example, Gunnar Heinsohn says pretty much the same things, and a Russian philosopher Galkovsky, pretty much the only living and active Russian philosopher, well, if you discount Dugin, I guess, but whatever, that's a separate subject. So yeah, well, the main issue anyway that kind of unites all of these narratives is the existence of Dark Ages, right, or Middle Ages in general. So there is this big mysterious gap, all right, between like the well-visible antiquity and well-visible modern times, and there's this mysterious epoch in between. So mostly new chronology in any shape or form deals with these Middle Ages some way, right? And the main method of dealing with it is actually, well, understandably just discarding them, right? So we say that around 700 or to 1000 perhaps years should be removed from our timeline, right? So this is the phantom time. So 700 to 1000, that's depending on who you listen to, right? Heinsohn talks about 700. Most other people talk about 1000, I would say. But again, that depends, right? And I would say I'm largely on board with this, even though I see some fundamental problems in like the very reasoning that the people follow when they conclude about this, like, that this gap should be just removed, all right? So I would propose some sort of like meta-criticism of this new chronology, and the criticism is such, well, the gaps may happen, actually, right? The societies may, like, downgrade, so to speak. The societies may disappear. And this linear progression of history that we kind of follow when we conclude that Middle Ages didn't exist, right? So there shouldn't be like a rise, then a gap, and then like a new rise, so to speak. It should be all linear, so the gap should be removed. That's basically the thinking behind the new chronology. So this linear thinking is also, like, it's assumed only in the framework of progress, right? And the idea of progress is like a fruit, you might say, of the era of enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment in its turn is itself just an echo of Christian thinking about time with its arrow and like coming from the creation of the world towards, or the birth of Jesus, if you wish, towards the, like, I don't know, end of the world, like the last judgment or the second coming or whatever else you might prefer. See my video, Repentive Thinking. I'll link it in the description, where I describe this process in more detail. So is this linear thinking, this progressive or progress-oriented thinking correct? Well, that's a big question, right? It's a paradigm, if you wish. It's not falsifiable. You either see it like this, so everything is linear, or you see it differently, where you acknowledge that gaps may happen, like societies may collapse, etc., etc., etc. Civilizations may die out, blah, blah, blah. But in my opinion, if you wish to hear it, like, there is no linear progress, right? There is no metric that you can put onto society and say, well, it linearly increases or decreases or whatever. But rather what we observe, I think, is a more complex evolution of societies, which cannot be quantified in any sort of like progressive manner, all right? This is my view anyway. So returning to Fomenko, and also like touching on political side of things, like, why is Fomenko so popular, especially in Russia and like Russian-speaking world in particular? Well, it's because he denies the colonial character of Russian state, the inherently colonial character of Russian state. He claims that Russia is a civilization of its own, which is incredibly useful for Russian propaganda, right? So that's why his books sell in millions in Russian-speaking world. So it's just a propagandist support of the Russian state, essentially, and all the endeavors of the modern Russian state, which, again, I would argue is kind of anti-Russian. Just look at what's going on right now. And from here, I would like to transition to my main point of this video, okay? So my statement is that alternative chronology, or new chronology if you wish, would win. So historical revisionism would prevail in the next decades, like maybe 20 to 50 years, or even less than that. So this view claims that, Middle Ages didn't exist, essentially, will prevail. This is my main point in this video. Why is that the case? Well, again, considering the political importance of history, right? How did Middle Ages appear in the first place? Again, at least according to the new chronological paradigm, is that they've been needed to like legitimize, if you wish, national states, right? To like give them some sort of thickness, right? Some sort of history, like some sort of basic mythology, if you wish. So, yeah, and since, as we've discussed many times before on this channel, the national states are dwindling, right? They're losing their power. They're essentially like gonna disappear completely in the next, well, a century at least, or at most, I should have said. So, yeah, the mythology behind national states is not needed anymore. In fact, it is actually actively harmful, right? For the integration efforts, for the building of civilization states. So yeah, this would lead the bureaucrats from civilization states to seek new historical narratives, and new chronology in any shape or form you prefer it. Well, at least this basic idea that Middle Ages is garbage, right? It would be adopted by the civilization states and their historians. So it's very easy to notice how it would happen in EU, like in the unified Europe or Eurabia. See my video, like why Muslims are welcome in Europe. I don't know about other places, like other civilization states such as China or India or Americas. I would assume they will have their version of this. Like Americans would definitely have to deal with slavery, like history of slavery somehow, right? So they'll develop some new paradigm. Based on that, some other things would happen in India and China probably. They would say, well, our modern history is written by Europeans, and screw Europeans, we'll write our own history. Something like that will happen, I think. But in general, the framework that I've given here is general enough, forgive me for tautology, that you can try to apply it to these other cases, these other places as well, okay? And you might say, well, how can you get rid of these dark ages? Well, obviously there have been some cultural gap, right? Some downfall of culture and civilization. Well, I'll give you just one example. Again, if you just completely ignore the research of people like Heinzon and others, like, think about it in this way. Well, paradoxically, dark ages could actually have been the sign of increase in civilization, increase in literacy, like, increase in technological advances, if you wish, on that level, I mean, like 1,000 years ago, if you wish. So, like, just like in 20th century, we've had a tremendous increase in literacy, and what we have is mass culture, right? And arguably, and many people complain about that mass culture has actually killed the high culture, you know, like the real culture, if you wish. So we have this exponential rise in literacy, technical advances, and access to culture in general, which seems to lead to a downgrade, all right? So it could have happened previously, just on another level, on another scale, all right? So if you look at modern times from like 50 years in the future, we're already kind of living in dark ages, you know. People don't read anymore, like nothing significant is happening. All of our cultural activities on the internet right now, which leaves kind of no traces at all in the physical world. Right? So, same could have happened, in dark ages. Like, people were, roughly speaking, writing Twitter posts, and then just like, instead of like, you know, philosophical opuses or whatever, and just throw them away on the next day, right? Because they're not fancy anymore. Like, some new meme, you know, is popular on the next day. So all of this didn't preserve, because nobody cared enough to preserve it. So the transition, my point is that the transition from antiquity to modern times may have been actually much smoother than we tend to think about it, right? Okay, so returning to the main subject. So new chronology, in any form, would help to get rid of the mythology behind national states, and also of all the quarrels between them, right? Which would help immensely in all these integration efforts that we observe currently. For example, you don't need to pay reparations for the previous offenses or whatever, like the crusades or jihads or whatever. If there were no such offenses in the first place, why would you be bothered with that, right? And obviously, I'm mentioning crusades and jihad specifically regarding Eurabia, because again, I don't really care about the other regions, like, it's their problem. Like, I'm describing the situation in Europe first and foremost. So yeah, getting rid of Middle Ages is a good first step on this path. And one might argue, one might metaphorically claim that the Middle Ages are sort of like a dark matter of history, you know. See my video about the dark matter, by the way. What is dark matter needed for? To give the galaxies more mass, right? So the Middle Ages are needed to give national states more mass. Like, it's to represent the national state as just the tip of the iceberg with a huge lump of stuff, invisible stuff, right? Unobservable stuff, unobservable in principle, just like dark matter is by definition, right? So anyway, to conclude, this is a big opportunity for people like Heinzon, for example, or any other new chronologist active in modern times. So if you're a historian, here's your chance. You may legit start a revolution in history under the banner of the United Europe, for example. You just have to wrap it up in a candy, you know, in a fancy way for the coming civilization states to get interested in. European state, for example, Eurabian state, or a Chinese civilization state, or Indian civilization state, or an American civilization state. So in the coming decades, again, I repeat, new chronology will prevail, inevitably. And then, as we've discussed, history would end anyway, around 2100, see my video, so who would care anyway, okay? Right, thank you for watching, the eons are closing!